His experience is proof that you do not ignore Sasquatch signs. I've told this story maybe a dozen times now. It doesn't get easier. September 2019. Clearwater National Forest. I took my 14-year-old nephew out for what should have been a routine elk scouting trip. First evening, we found tracks by the creek, 16 inches long, barefoot, pressed 3 inches into the mud. I told him it was probably a prank. I didn't believe that. That night, something circled our tent for almost an hour. Heavy, bipedal, patient. The smell came next. Rotting meat and wet fur, and something I still can't scrub from my memory. My grandfather grabbed my arm once at a family reunion, said something I'd buried for 30 years. There's people out there that ain't people. I should have listened. I should have left that first morning. I didn't. And what happened next still keeps me up at night. I've told this story maybe a dozen times now. To my sister, to a ranger, to some people online who've been through similar things. It doesn't get easier. If anything, it gets harder, because every time I say it out loud, I have to accept again that it actually happened, that I'm not crazy, that my grandfather wasn't crazy either. My name's Darren Kubiak. I'm 52 years old, commercial electrician out of Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. I've been doing electrical work for almost 30 years, which means I'm wired to think in systems and logic. I troubleshoot problems for a living. I don't jump to conclusions. I follow the evidence until it leads somewhere that makes sense. What happened in September of 2019 doesn't make sense, but it happened anyway. I'd been hunting the Clearwater drainage since I was 14 years old. My dad first took me out there in '86, the fall after I finished 8th grade. He knew those woods like most people know their own neighborhood. Every game trail, every creek crossing, every ridge where the elk liked to bed down in early morning. He taught me all of it, year after year, until I could navigate that country in the dark if I had to. Dad passed in 2016. Lung cancer. Nothing to do with smoking, just bad luck, the doctors said. He was 71. We had time to say what needed saying, which is more than a lot of people get. But after he was gone, I felt this pull to keep the tradition alive, to pass it forward the way he'd passed it to me. My nephew Tommy was 14 that September, same age I'd been when Dad first brought me out. He'd been asking about hunting for a couple years, and his mom, my sister Linda, finally agreed he was old enough. 4 days in the backcountry, scouting for elk before rifle season opened in October. Uncle-nephew trip. Quality time. I remember the drive out there. 2.5 hours from Coeur d'Alene, watching the landscape shift from rolling farmland to serious timber. Tommy was quiet in the passenger seat, a little nervous, I think, though he was trying not to show it. He had his grandfather's eyes, my dad's eyes, this pale gray blue that always looked like they were studying something just past the horizon. We talked about gear, about what to expect, about how the first trip is always the hardest because your body isn't used to the work yet. I told him stories about my dad, about learning to glass a meadow for movement, about the time we got caught in a thunderstorm on an exposed ridge and had to hunker down under a rock overhang for 3 hours. What I didn't tell him, what I barely let myself think about, was something my grandfather said to me once. Roy Kubiak, Korean War veteran, logger, rancher, hard as railroad iron his whole life. He died in '93 when I was 21. But there was this one time, summer of '87, family reunion at my aunt's place outside Moscow. Grandpa Roy was 3 beers into the afternoon. which was unusual for him. He wasn't much of a drinker. He grabbed my arm, grabbed it hard enough to leave fingerprints in the skin, looked me dead in the eye and said, "You stay out of the deep timber after dark. There's people out there that ain't people." That was it. He let go, walked away, never mentioned it again. I was 15. I thought he was going senile, maybe having some kind of episode. Dad never talked about it, and I learned quick not to bring it up. But driving into Clearwater with Tommy beside me, passing the familiar landmarks, watching the trees close in on both sides of the road, those words came back. Uninvited. Unwelcome. I pushed them down. Told myself it was just old memories stirred up by grief. Grandpa Roy had been gone for over 25 years. Whatever he thought he saw back in '61, it had nothing to do with me and Tommy and a routine scouting trip. I was wrong about that. I was wrong about a lot of things. I should explain something about my grandfather before I go any further. Roy Kubiak wasn't the kind of man who spooked easy. He landed at Incheon in 1950, spent 2 years in Korea doing things he never talked about. Came home, married my grandmother, built a life in northern Idaho when half this country was still wilderness. He logged old growth in the 50s and 60s, worked alone in timber so remote you couldn't get a vehicle within 10 miles of it. If there was a man in my family who didn't scare, it was him. So when he grabbed my arm at that reunion, when I saw the look in his eyes, it stuck with me. Not because of what he said, but because of how he said it. Like he was begging me to listen. Like he knew I wouldn't. The memory had faded over the years, the way uncomfortable things do. I got married, got divorced, built my career, watched my parents get older, and then watched my dad get sick. Life has a way of burying the strange stuff under layers of ordinary, but it never really goes away. It just waits. Driving through Clearwater that September afternoon, I started thinking about the timeline. Grandpa Roy saw something in 1961. He'd have been about 29 then, in his prime, probably still logging. The same drainage where I'd been hunting for over 30 years. The same country I was bringing Tommy into. I tried to do the math on what could have scared him. Bear, maybe. Grizzlies weren't common in that area, but they showed up occasionally. Mountain lion. Wolves, though they'd been mostly gone back then. None of it fit the way he'd said it. People that ain't people. Not animals. Not predators. People. I glanced over at Tommy. He was watching the trees go by, probably wondering what the next few days would bring. I thought about telling him the story, warning him the way Grandpa Roy had warned me. I didn't. Part of it was not wanting to scare him before we'd even started. Part of it was embarrassment. What kind of grown man passes on ghost stories from a dead relative? But mostly, I think, I didn't tell him because I didn't want to admit that the story had any weight. That somewhere in the back of my mind, I'd been carrying it for 32 years. My dad never acknowledged what Grandpa Roy said. Not once in all the years we hunted together. And Dad knew those woods as well as anyone alive. If there was something out there, something to worry about, he would have told me. That's what I kept telling myself. What I know now, looking back, is that silence runs in my family. The men in my family see things, and then they don't talk about them. Grandpa Roy broke that silence once, for 15 seconds, and I watched him regret it immediately. Dad kept his mouth shut his whole life, and after what happened with Tommy, I understand why. Some things you can't explain to people who haven't seen them. And some things you shouldn't explain, because then they become real. They become something you have to deal with, instead of something you can file away and forget. I pulled off the highway onto the Forest Service Road around 2 in the afternoon. 12 miles of gravel and potholes to the trailhead, the truck bouncing and creaking over washboard ruts. Tommy held onto the door handle and didn't complain. Good kid, tougher than he looked. The trailhead was empty when we arrived. Just a wooden sign marking the wilderness boundary and a small dirt lot with room for maybe 4 vehicles. I parked, killed the engine, and sat there for a moment listening to the tick of cooling metal and the absolute silence of the forest. No wind. No birds. Just timber and shadow, and the weight of something I couldn't name. "Ready?" I asked Tommy. He nodded, grabbed his pack from the back seat. We started walking. 3 miles to camp, all of it uphill. Every step taking us further from the truck, from cell service, from anyone who might hear us if we called for help. I told myself we wouldn't need help. I'd made this hike dozens of times. Nothing had ever gone wrong. But Grandpa Roy's words walked with me anyway. There's people out there that ain't people. The hike in was 3 miles, all uphill, gaining about 800 feet of elevation through timber that got thicker the further we went. Tommy kept pace better than I expected. He didn't complain, didn't ask how much further. Just put his head down and walked. I could see his legs burning on the steeper sections. Mine were too, if I'm honest. But he pushed through. Made me proud. We hit my usual camp spot around 4:30 in the afternoon. It's a flat bench maybe 40 yards across, sitting above a creek that runs year-round. Good sight lines in 3 directions, decent tree cover, close enough to water that you don't have to haul it far. I'd camped there probably 15 times over the years, knew every rock, every root, every angle where the morning sun would hit. Setting up was automatic. Tent first, staked tight, rain fly secured even though the sky was clear. Then the bear hang. I found a solid branch about 12 feet up on a lodgepole pine and ran my rope over it, hoisting our food bag out of reach. Trucker's hitch, 2 half hitches to lock it off. I'd tied that same sequence 100 times. Could do it blindfolded. Tommy gathered firewood while I got the camp squared away. He was thorough about it, bringing back armloads of dead fall, sorting them by size the way I'd shown him. Good kid. Paid attention. By the time we had a fire going, the light was starting to soften. That golden hour before sunset, when everything looks painted. I grabbed my binoculars and told Tommy we were going to glass the meadow on the next ridge over, see if any elk were moving into the open to feed. We hiked maybe half a mile to a rocky outcrop with a clear view down into a drainage. The meadow below was maybe 300 yards long, bordered by willows along a creek and thick spruce on the far side. Prime elk country. I settled onto a flat rock and started scanning, teaching Tommy how to work a grid pattern, how to look for movement first and shape second. For maybe 20 minutes, it was perfect. Cool air, quiet forest, the 2 of us sharing something that mattered. I thought about my dad, how he'd sat in this same spot with me decades ago, how the tradition was continuing the way it was supposed to. Then Tommy said, "Uncle Darren? What's that down there?" He was pointing toward the creek, about 200 yards below us. I swung my binoculars over and found what he was looking at. Impressions in the mud along the bank. A line of them, spaced maybe 4 feet apart, leading from the water into the tree line. Probably elk tracks, I said. But even as I said it, I knew that wasn't right. The shape was wrong. Too narrow. Too distinct. Can we go look? I should have said no. I should have told him it was getting dark, that we needed to get back to camp, that whatever made those prints wasn't our concern. But part of me needed to know, part of me was already doing the math. The spacing, the size. What kind of animal walks on two legs and leaves prints that big? We picked our way down the ridge and crossed the meadow to the creek bank. The mud there was soft, saturated from recent rain. The impressions were clear. They were tracks, barefoot, human-shaped, with 5 distinct toes, but they were 16 inches long at least. I knelt down and put my hand next to one for scale. My hand looked like a child's. The tracks were pressed 3 inches deep into the mud, which meant serious weight behind them. 400 pounds, maybe more. Tommy was quiet beside me. I could feel him waiting for me to explain it, to make it normal. Probably a prank, I said. Locals messing around. You can buy fake feet online, strap them to your boots. Out here, people do weird things. He didn't argue, but I could tell he didn't believe me. Smart kid. Smarter than I was giving him credit for. We hiked back to camp in the fading light. I built up the fire bigger than necessary and started cooking dinner, talking too much about elk patterns and wind direction, and nothing important. Filling the silence with noise so neither of us had to think about what we'd seen. Those tracks stayed with me all night. 16 inches long, 3 inches deep, 5 toes. People that ain't people. I told myself it didn't mean anything. I told myself there was an explanation. I told myself a lot of things. Dinner was freeze-dried beef stroganoff, which tastes better in the backcountry than it has any right to. I taught Tommy how to read the wind by tossing pine needles and watching them fall. Told him stories about hunts with my dad, the 8-point buck we tracked for 2 days, the time we got turned around in a snowstorm and had to build a snow cave. Normal stuff. Father to son stuff, passed down through an uncle because that's how it worked out. Tommy relaxed some. The fire helped. Fire always helps. Something about it reaches back into whatever primitive part of our brain remembers when flames meant safety, meant the darkness couldn't touch you. We turned in around 9. The temperature was already dropping, low 30s maybe, heading toward the mid-20s by morning. I zipped our sleeping bags tight and listened to Tommy's breathing slow as he drifted off. Kid was exhausted. 3-mile hike with a pack, the elevation, the fresh air. He'd sleep hard. I didn't. I lay there in the dark, replaying those tracks in my mind, running the calculations. A hoax made sense if you didn't think about it too hard. But we were 3 miles from the nearest road, in a drainage I'd never seen another person in. Who hikes that far into wilderness just to fake some footprints? And the depth of them. That wasn't just someone walking around in wooden feet. That was real weight. Biological weight. I must have fallen asleep eventually, because the next thing I remember is waking up to footsteps. My watch said 2:14 a.m. The fire had died to embers, barely visible through the tent fabric. And something was walking outside. Not the light pad of a deer, not the shuffling, uneven gait of a bear. This was bipedal. 2 legs, steady rhythm, heavy. Each footfall deliberate, patient. The sound of something that knew exactly where it was going and wasn't in any hurry to get there. It was circling the tent. I reached for my flashlight without thinking, then stopped. Something told me not to. Some instinct from deep down, older than language, older than thought. Don't move, don't make noise, don't let it know you're awake. The circling continued, slow, methodical. I tried to count the steps, tried to estimate the distance, but my mind wasn't working right. Fear does that. Real fear shuts down the thinking parts and leaves you with nothing but the animal underneath. Then the smell hit. I've been around dead things in the woods, gut piles from field dressing, winter kills rotting in spring thaw, even a black bear carcass once that had been there for weeks. This was worse. A thick, glandular musk, like rotting meat mixed with wet dog and something else underneath. Something almost human, but not quite. The smell of something alive that shouldn't exist. Tommy's eyes were open. I could see them reflecting the faint ember glow. Wide. Terrified. He didn't say anything. Didn't move. Just stared at me, waiting for me to do something. To fix it. To make it go away. I should have grabbed the rifle. Should have unzipped the tent and confronted whatever was out there. That's what the hero does in the stories, right? Takes action. Protects his family. I didn't. I lay there, frozen, listening to something circle our tent for what felt like an hour. Could have been 20 minutes. Could have been longer. Time stops meaning anything when you're that scared. Finally, I clicked on the flashlight, shined it through the mesh window on the tent door, sweeping the beam across the tree line. Nothing. Empty forest. The footsteps had stopped the instant the light came on. We didn't sleep again. Just lay there in the dark, not talking, waiting for dawn. At some point, Tommy reached over and grabbed my arm, the way a little kid would. He was 14, almost a man, but right then he was just a scared boy in the woods with his uncle. I held his arm and watched the tent walls brighten slowly as the sky turned gray. Whatever had been out there, it was gone now, but it knew where we were, and I was pretty sure it would be back. I waited until the sky had enough gray in it to see, then told Tommy to stay put while I checked outside. He didn't argue, just nodded and pulled his sleeping bag tighter around his shoulders. The morning was cold, mid-30s, maybe lower. My breath hung in the air as I unzipped the tent and stepped out. The fire was dead, not even embers left. Everything looked normal. Trees, rocks, the creek murmuring in the distance. No tracks, visible on the hard-packed ground around camp. Pine needles covered most of it anyway. I did a slow circle, rifle in hand, scanning the tree line. Nothing moved. No sounds except a light wind through the branches. Whatever had been here last night was gone. Then I walked to the bear hang. I knew something was wrong before I got there. The food bag was on the ground, sitting upright at the base of the lodgepole pine like someone had set it down carefully. My first thought was the rope broke. My second thought was a bear pulled it down. Neither of those thoughts held up when I looked closer. The rope was still attached to the bag. It ran up to the branch 12 feet overhead, looped over, and came back down to where I'd tied it off the night before. Except, it wasn't tied anymore. The knots, trucker's hitch, 2 half hitches, the same system I'd used for 30 years, had been undone. Not cut. Not torn. Undone. The rope was coiled at the base of the tree in loose loops, almost neat, like someone had taken the time to arrange it. I stood there for a long time, longer than I should have. A bear can't untie knots. A bear would have torn the bag open, scattered the contents, left claw marks on the bark. There were no claw marks. The bag wasn't torn. It was sitting there intact, the drawstring still cinched tight. A raccoon couldn't have managed it either. Couldn't have reached it. Couldn't have had the strength. Couldn't have figured out a trucker's hitch in the dark. My grandfather's words came back again. People that ain't people. I thought about the tracks by the creek. 16 inches, human-shaped, 5 toes. I thought about the footsteps circling our tent, that slow, patient orbit, the smell that came with them. I thought about how the circling stopped the instant I turned on my flashlight. Not startled away, just stopped, like whatever was out there decided to leave when it realized we were awake. These were not the actions of an animal. Animals don't problem solve like this. Animals don't test you. Animals don't circle your camp for an hour, leave without taking anything, then come back later and methodically undo your knots just to prove they can. This was something else. I should have packed up right then. Should have gotten Tommy out of there before things got worse. That's what any sensible person would have done. That's what I'd tell anyone else to do if they described the same situation to me. But I didn't. Part of it was stubbornness. I'd been coming to these woods my whole adult life. This was my place, my tradition, my inheritance from my father. I wasn't ready to let something take that away from me. Part of it was denial. If I left now, I'd have to admit that what was happening was real. I'd have to accept that my grandfather wasn't senile, that the family stories were more than stories, that something lived in these mountains that shouldn't exist. And part of it, the part I'm not proud of, was curiosity. The electrician in me, the troubleshooter, the guy who follows the wires until he finds the problem. I wanted to know. I wanted to see it for myself. So I rehung the food bag. Tighter knots this time. Told myself I'd sleep lighter, keep the rifle closer. Told myself we'd stay one more day and then leave first thing the following morning. I walked back to the tent and told Tommy we were fine. Told him a raccoon must have gotten lucky with the rope. Told him we'd scout for elk today and head out tomorrow. He looked at me with those gray-blue eyes, my dad's eyes, and I could tell he didn't believe me. Smart kid. Sunlight changes everything. I know that sounds simple, but it's true. The same forest that feels hostile in the dark becomes almost friendly when the sun's up. Colors come back. Shadows shrink. The fear that seemed so absolute at 2 a.m. fades into something you can almost dismiss. Almost. We ate breakfast. Granola bars, instant coffee heated over a small fire, and I laid out the plan. We'd hike the ridge to the north, check some elk wallows I knew about, put some distance between ourselves and whatever had visited camp the night before. Tommy seemed relieved to be moving. So was I. The first couple hours were good. We found elk sign everywhere, tracks in the soft dirt near a seep spring, fresh droppings, rubs on the aspens where bulls had scraped velvet off their antlers. I showed Tommy how to age the sign, how to read the direction of travel, how to think like an elk. He asked good questions, paid attention. For a while, it felt like the trip was supposed to feel. But something was off, and it took me until mid-morning to figure out what. The forest was quiet. Not just calm, silent. No birds calling. No squirrels chattering in the branches. No insects humming. Just the sound of our boots on the trail and the occasional creak of wind through the trees. I've spent enough time in the woods to know what that kind of silence means. It means something's out there that the animals don't want to be near. A predator. Something that makes the whole forest hold its breath and wait. I didn't say anything to Tommy, just kept walking, kept pointing out elk sign, kept pretending everything was fine. But I was watching the trees now, scanning the shadows, listening for anything that didn't belong. We looped back toward camp in the late afternoon. The sun was dropping behind the western ridges, throwing long shadows across the drainage. We were maybe half a mile out when I heard it. A crack. Sharp and loud, like a baseball bat hitting a tree trunk. It came from the east, maybe 200 yards away. Tommy stopped. "What was that?" Before I could answer, another crack came from the west. Same sound, same volume, same sharp report, like an answer. Wood knocks. I'd read about them online, heard about them in stories. People in the Bigfoot community talk about them constantly, a form of communication, they say. A way for them to signal each other across distances. I'd always thought it was nonsense. Woodpeckers, falling branches, people hearing patterns in random noise. But this wasn't random. The timing was too precise. The sounds were too similar. And they were coming from opposite directions, like something was triangulating our position. "Woodpecker," I told Tommy. "Big one. Pileated, probably." He looked at me, looked at the trees, didn't say anything. We walked the rest of the way to camp in silence. The knocks didn't come again, but I could feel something watching us. That prickle on the back of your neck, that weight in the air. The forest knew we were there. And so did something else. That evening, I made a decision I've questioned every day since. I'd brought a trail camera on the trip. A Moultrie, nothing fancy. The kind you strap to a tree to capture deer and elk movement. Battery-powered, motion-activated, infrared flash for night shots. I'd used it dozens of times to scout game patterns before rifle season. But that night, I wasn't thinking about elk. After dinner, I told Tommy I needed to check something and hiked about 150 yards from camp to a game trail I knew. It ran through a narrow gap between two boulders, a natural funnel that anything moving through the drainage would have to pass. I strapped the camera to a lodgepole pine about chest height, angled it toward the gap, and turned it on. I didn't tell Tommy what I was doing, didn't tell him I was trying to photograph whatever had circled our tent, didn't tell him I was past the point of denial and into something else, something between fear and obsession. Back at camp, I built the fire bigger than usual, kept it burning hot and bright, feeding it until the flames were waist-high. Tommy sat close, not talking much, poking at the coals with a stick. The silence between us was heavy with things neither of us wanted to say. Around midnight, the wood knocks started again. 3 of them this time, in quick succession. Closer than before, maybe 100 yards out, somewhere in the timber to the north. I timed the intervals on my watch. 8 seconds between the first and second. 12 seconds between the second and third. Then silence. A minute later, an answer came from the south. 2 knocks. Different rhythm. I sat there listening, the rifle across my knees, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. It wasn't random. There was structure to it, pattern, something that felt almost like language. Call and response, information being exchanged. Tommy had stopped poking the fire. He was staring into the darkness beyond the firelight, his face pale and drawn. "Uncle Darren?" "Yeah. That's not a woodpecker, is it?" It wasn't a question. and I couldn't lie to him anymore. "No," I said. "I don't think it is." We didn't talk after that. Just sat by the fire until the flames died down to embers and the cold started creeping in. The knocks came twice more, once around 1 in the morning, once closer to 2, but they stayed at a distance, testing, probing, letting us know they were there. I thought about my grandfather again, thought about what he must have seen in 1961 to make a man like him, a Korean War veteran, a logger, someone who'd spent his whole life in hard country, avoid deep timber for the rest of his days. Thought about my father, who'd hunted these same woods with me for decades and never said a word. How much did Dad know? How much had he seen and chosen not to tell me? The silence of the men in my family suddenly made a different kind of sense. Not ignorance, not denial, protection. They'd been trying to protect me from something they couldn't explain, couldn't fight, couldn't even talk about without sounding crazy. And now here I was, sitting in the same forest, listening to the same sounds, making the same choice they'd made. Stay quiet. Don't acknowledge it. Pretend it isn't real. Except I had a camera out there, and in the morning, I'd know for sure. Tommy finally fell asleep around 3, slumped against his pack with his jacket pulled up to his chin. I stayed awake until dawn, watching the tree line, listening to a forest that never quite went silent. Whatever was out there, it was patient. It had all the time in the world. We didn't. I retrieved the camera at first light. My hands were shaking as I pulled the SD card and slipped it into my phone. 12 triggered exposures overnight. I scrolled through them with Tommy looking over my shoulder, both of us barely breathing. The first 8 were nothing. Wind-moved branches, a blur that might have been an owl, empty frames where the motion sensor had tripped on shadows. Then I hit frame 9. Timestamp, 3:47 a.m. The infrared flash had fired, washing everything in that flat, gray-green night vision look. And there, between the trees, maybe 20 feet from the camera, was a shape. It was bipedal, standing upright. Massive. I could tell by comparing it to a branch I'd measured the day before. A branch I knew was exactly 6 feet off the ground. This thing's shoulder was above that branch, 7 feet at least, maybe more. The proportions were wrong for a human. Too wide in the shoulders, arms too long, head set forward on the neck in a way that looked almost ape-like. The image was grainy, indistinct. You could argue it was a bear standing on its hind legs. You could argue it was a man in a suit. You could argue it was a trick of the light, pareidolia, the human brain seeing patterns that weren't there. You could argue all those things. I couldn't believe any of them. Frames 10 and 11 showed the same figure from slightly different angles as it moved through the gap. Frame 12 was empty. It had passed out of range. Tommy stared at the screen for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "Can we leave now?" "Tomorrow morning," I said. "First thing." I should have said yes. Should have packed up right then and hiked out. But something in me wasn't finished. The troubleshooter, the wire tracer, the part of my brain that needs to understand how things work. It wasn't satisfied with blurry photographs. It wanted more. "There's something I want to check first," he said. "The drainage where we found the tracks. It's not far." Tommy didn't want to go. I could see it in his face, the way his whole body tensed at the suggestion. but he didn't argue, just nodded and picked up his pack. We hiked half a mile through thickening timber, following the creek upstream toward where we'd found those 16-inch prints 2 days before. The forest was quiet again, that heavy, watchful silence that pressed against your ears. I smelled it before I saw it. That same glandular musk from the first night, but mixed with something else now. Something copper-sharp and organic. Blood. The deer was wedged into a tree fork about 8 feet off the ground. A mature doe, maybe 140 pounds. Her neck was twisted almost backwards, the spine clearly broken. No blood trail on the ground below, no drag marks, no sign of how she'd gotten up there. She'd been placed, lifted 8 feet in the air and wedged into that fork like a message. Tommy made a sound beside me. Not a scream, something quieter and worse. A kind of moan that came from somewhere deep. I grabbed his arm and turned us around. We walked back to camp fast, neither of us speaking. That night, I didn't sleep at all. The third night was the worst. I knew it would be. Something had shifted after we found that deer. Some invisible line had been crossed, and whatever was out there knew we'd seen too much. I didn't even try to sleep. Just sat up in the tent with my back against my pack, Dad's rifle across my knees, watching the darkness through the mesh window. Tommy crashed around 11, his body finally giving out from exhaustion and fear. I was glad. I didn't want him awake for whatever came next. The wood knocks had stopped. That was the thing that bothered me most. For 2 nights, they'd been constant. That back and forth communication echoing through the timber, mapping our position, coordinating movements I couldn't see. Now there was nothing. Just silence so thick it pressed against your eardrums. I've been in quiet forests before. This wasn't that. This was the silence of something waiting, something watching. The whole drainage felt like it was holding its breath. I checked my watch constantly. 11:30, midnight, 12:45. The temperature dropped into the 20s, and I could see my breath fogging in the dim glow of my headlamp, turned down to its lowest setting. Every few minutes I'd scan the tree line through the mesh, looking for movement, looking for eyes reflecting light. Nothing. Just black timber and darker shadows. Around 2 in the morning, I started to drift. Not real sleep, more like that half-conscious state where your eyes are open, but your brain starts shutting down. 3 days of barely sleeping will do that to you. Your body takes over whether you want it to or not. That's when I felt the pressure. It started at the side of the tent, near my head. A slow, deliberate pressing inward. The nylon fabric stretched toward me, deforming around something on the other side. Not pushing hard, just enough to make contact. Just enough to let me know it was there. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Didn't reach for the rifle, even though my hands were inches from it. Something deeper than thought told me that stillness was survival, that any sudden movement would be the wrong choice. The pressure shifted, moved along the tent wall toward my face. I could see the shape of it now through the fabric. A hand, maybe. Or something like a hand. Too big. Fingers too long. It traced along the nylon like it was feeling for something, testing the barrier between us. Then the breathing started. Long, wet inhalations, slow and deep, with a faint rumble underneath, something between a growl and a purr. It was inches from my face, separated by nothing but a thin layer of tent fabric. I could smell it again. That rancid musk, stronger than before, filling the tent like fog. I looked at my watch. 2:07. I made myself focus on the numbers, count the seconds, give my mind something to do besides panic. The pressure held. The breathing continued. Tommy was still asleep beside me, thank God. Or maybe he was awake and frozen like I was, too scared to move or speak. 11 minutes. I counted every one of them on my watch's dim display. 11 minutes of something pressing against the tent, breathing wetly, close enough to touch, if not for the nylon between us. Then the pressure released. The fabric snapped back to its normal shape. Heavy footsteps moved away from the tent, not running, not hurried. Just walking, unhurried, like it had accomplished whatever it came to do. I sat there shaking for an hour afterward. Couldn't stop. My hands trembled so bad I couldn't have worked the rifle's bolt if I'd needed to. Something had been right there, right next to me. Close enough that I could hear its lungs working, smell its body, feel the heat of it through the tent wall. And it had chosen to leave. That's what got me. That's what still gets me 5 years later. It could have come through that tent like it was tissue paper. Could have ended both of us without breaking stride. Instead, it pressed against the fabric, breathed in my face, and walked away. Why? I've thought about it 1,000 times since. The only answer I can come up with is that it was making a point, showing me how close it could get, showing me how helpless I was. We can reach you anytime we want. We're choosing not to. For now. Dawn couldn't come fast enough. I woke Tommy the Concajon. Second, there was enough light to see. We're leaving, I said. Right now. Pack your stuff. He didn't ask why. Didn't argue or complain. Just looked at me with those gray-blue eyes and started stuffing his sleeping bag into its sack. I think he already knew. Maybe he'd been awake during those 11 minutes after all. Maybe he'd felt the pressure on the tent, heard the breathing, smelled that smell. We never talked about it. Still haven't. I broke camp faster than I ever have in my life. Tent down in 3 minutes, stuffed into its bag without bothering to fold it properly. Bear hang pulled down, rope coiled and shoved into my pack. Gear check abandoned. If I forgot something, I'd buy a new one. None of it mattered. The whole time I was moving, I kept running through everything in my head. The tracks by the creek, 16 inches, 3 inches deep. The footsteps circling our tent that first night. The rope, untied with fingers, coiled neatly at the base of the tree. The wood knocks, call and response, mapping our position. The game camera images, that massive shape between the trees, over 7 feet tall, bipedal. The deer wedged into the tree fork, neck twisted backward, placed 8 feet off the ground like a warning. And last night, the pressure on the tent, the breathing, the 11 minutes of knowing something was right there, inches away, choosing whether to let us live. I had the photographs. I had physical evidence of something that shouldn't exist. Part of me, the electrician, the troubleshooter, wanted to stay longer, document more, prove what I was seeing. The rest of me just wanted to get my nephew out of there alive. Ready? I asked Tommy. He nodded. His pack was on, straps cinched tight. He looked older than 14 somehow, like something had aged him overnight. Stay ahead of me, I said. On the trail, where I can see you. Don't stop for anything. We started hiking. 4 miles to the truck, all downhill, through timber that felt different in the morning light. Less familiar, more hostile. Like we were being watched from every shadow, every gap between the trees. 20 minutes in, I knew we were being followed. The sounds started on our left, maybe 50 yards into the timber. Branches snapping, undergrowth crunching. Something heavy moving through the forest, matching our pace exactly. When we walked, it walked. When we stopped to listen, it stopped too. I unslung the rifle and clicked off the safety, kept Tommy ahead of me, kept my eyes on the tree line. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. "Keep moving," I told Tommy. "Don't run, just walk, steady pace." He didn't look back, just walked faster, his shoulders hunched, his hands gripping his pack straps like they were the only solid thing in the world. 3 miles to go, then 2. The sound stayed with us the whole way, that patient, deliberate paralleling, letting us know we weren't alone, letting us know we couldn't escape without being seen. The truck was close now. I could feel it. Salvation waiting at the end of the trail. But I already knew something was wrong. The sounds stayed with us for over a mile, always on our left, always just out of sight, always matching our pace with a precision that felt almost mocking, like it wanted us to know it was there, like the whole point was making sure we understood. I've hunted these woods for 30 years. I know what animals sound like moving through timber. Deer are light, quick, nervous. Bears crash through brush without caring about noise. Elk are somewhere in between, big enough to make sound, cautious enough to pause and listen. This was none of those things. This was something heavy, 400 pounds at least, based on how the undergrowth compressed. Something bipedal, based on the rhythm. 2 feet, not 4. And something intelligent, based on how it maintained exactly the same distance from us, no matter how fast or slow we walked. Tommy was crying, trying not to, but I could see his shoulders shaking, could hear the ragged catch in his breathing. He kept his eyes forward, kept walking, didn't ask me what to do. Good kid. Tougher than most adults would be in the same situation. I wanted to tell him it would be okay. I wanted to promise him we'd make it out. But the words wouldn't come because I wasn't sure they were true. Then the vocalization started. I don't know how to describe the sound. I've tried 100 times since and nothing quite captures it. The closest I can get is this. Imagine a woman screaming, but run that scream through a garbage disposal. Distort it, stretch it, add a bass undertone that you feel in your chest more than hear with your ears. It rose and fell in pitch, lasted maybe 5 seconds, and came from somewhere off to our left. Tommy froze. I nearly walked into him. "Keep moving," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "Don't stop, we're almost there." He started walking again. Faster now, almost jogging. I didn't tell him to slow down. The vocalization came again. Closer this time, maybe 30 yards out. I caught a glimpse of movement between the trees. Something dark, something big, there and gone before I could focus on it. Just shadow displacement. Just a shape that didn't belong. I raised the rifle halfway, then lowered it. What was I going to do? Shoot into the trees at something I couldn't see? And even if I hit it, even if I somehow managed to wound whatever was out there, what then? I had 5 rounds in the magazine. This thing had been toying with us for 3 days. We weren't predators here. We were prey being allowed to leave. That realization settled into me like ice water. It could have taken us any time it wanted. That first night when it circled the tent. Last night when it pressed against the fabric inches from my face. Any moment during this mile-long escort through its territory. It was choosing not to. I thought about the deer wedged into that tree fork. The strength it would take to lift a 140-pound carcass 8 feet off the ground. The casual display of power, the message it sent. This is what we can do. This is what we're capable of. And yet here we were, still walking, still breathing, being herded toward the trailhead like cattle being moved to a new pasture. The sounds continued for another quarter mile. Then, gradually, they faded. The heavy footfalls grew more distant, less frequent. The silence of the forest started to return, not the watchful silence of something waiting, but something closer to normal. Birds beginning to call again. A squirrel chattering somewhere overhead. It was letting us go. I didn't relax, didn't lower the rifle. Just kept walking, kept Tommy ahead of me, kept my eyes on the trees until the timber started to thin and I could see daylight ahead. The trailhead, the parking area, the truck. We broke into a run for the last 100 yards. Both of us. Couldn't help it. The truck sat there dusty and ordinary, exactly where I'd left it 4 days ago, and it looked like the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. Then I got close enough to see what they'd done to it. The driver's side mirror was sitting on the hood. I stopped maybe 30 feet from the truck, close enough to see but far enough that my brain needed a moment to process what it was looking at. Tommy kept running for a few more steps, then realized I wasn't with him and turned back. "Uncle Darren? What's wrong?" I didn't answer, just stared at the mirror. It hadn't fallen off. It hadn't been broken by a branch or knocked loose by an animal. The mounting bracket was still attached to the door, but the bolts that held the mirror assembly in place had been sheared clean through. Metal bolts, 3 of them, snapped like toothpicks, and the mirror itself was sitting on the hood of the truck, face up, reflecting the gray morning sky like a pool of still water, placed there, deliberately, carefully. A message. I walked to the truck slowly, rifle still in my hands, scanning the tree line with every step. Nothing moved. Nothing made a sound. Just me and Tommy and the truck and that mirror sitting where it didn't belong. I picked it up, turned it over. No scratches on the glass. No damage to the housing. Just the sheared bolts where something had gripped it and pulled until the metal gave way. I thought about the grip strength that would require. Thought about the game camera images, that massive shape between the trees. Thought about hands big enough to palm a basketball, fingers strong enough to snap steel. We were at your truck. We could have done anything we wanted. We touched your way out, your connection to the world you came from, and we let you keep it. That's what the mirror meant. That's what the whole thing meant. The circling, the knocks, the tent, the pursuit. All of it was communication. All of it was a message delivered in a language I was only beginning to understand. We see you. We know you. We're letting you leave. Don't come back. Get in the truck, I told Tommy. He didn't argue, just climbed into the passenger seat and pulled the door shut. I walked around to the driver's side, opened the door, and sat behind the wheel. The keys were in my pocket where I'd left them. The engine turned over on the first try. I looked back at the tree line one more time. The forest looked exactly like it always had. Quiet, green, indifferent. No sign of what lived in there. No evidence except a sheared mirror and a head full of memories I'd never be able to explain. I put the truck in gear and drove. We didn't talk on the way out. 12 miles of gravel road, then the highway, then the long drive back toward Coeur d'Alene. Tommy stared out the window the whole time, watching the trees go by, flinching slightly every time the road curved close to heavy timber. I stopped in Orofino to get gas. While the tank filled, I stood outside the truck and looked at the mountains rising to the east. The Clearwater drainage was back there somewhere. The camp where we'd spent 3 nights. The creek where we'd found those tracks. I'd been hunting those woods for over 30 years. My father had taken me there when I was Tommy's age. His father had known the country before roads reached half of it. And something had been there the whole time. Watching. Waiting. Letting us play in its territory as long as we didn't look too closely. I finished filling the tank and got back in the truck. Tommy was asleep, his head against the window, exhaustion finally winning out over fear. I had a decision to make. Report what happened, or bury it. Tell the truth, or stay silent like my grandfather, like my father, like all the men in my family who'd seen something they couldn't explain. I drove to the ranger station instead of home. The Clearwater National Forest Ranger Station in Orofino is a small building off Highway 12, the kind of place you'd drive past without noticing if you weren't looking for it. I'd been there a few times over the years, checking on fire conditions, picking up permits, asking about road closures. Normal stuff, hunter stuff. This wasn't normal. I left Tommy sleeping in the truck and walked inside. The officer at the front desk was a guy named Hendricks, mid-50s, gray at the temples, the kind of weathered face you get from decades of working outdoors. His uniform was neat, his handshake firm. He had the look of someone who'd seen a lot and learned not to react to most of it. Help you with something? I told him everything. The tracks by the creek, the footsteps circling the tent, the rope untied with fingers, the wood knocks, the game camera images, the deer wedged into the tree fork, the pressure on the tent, the breathing, the 11 minutes, the pursuit on the hike out, the mirror on the hood of my truck. Hendricks took notes the whole time, nodded in the right places, asked clarifying questions with the polite detachment of someone who'd heard this kind of story before. How big were the tracks? What time did the vocalizations occur? Could I describe the smell? When I finished, I pulled out my phone and showed him the game camera images. The 3 frames time-stamped at 3:47 a.m. The shape between the trees, massive, bipedal, wrong. He looked at them for a long time, longer than I expected. His face didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. Recognition, maybe, or something closer to resignation. Then he closed his notebook and leaned back in his chair. We've had a few odd reports from that drainage over the years, he said. Nothing conclusive. Probably bears. They can walk on their hind legs for short distances, and people sometimes misidentify them in low light. Could be hoaxers, too. We get those occasionally. Hard to say. What about the images? Interesting, he said. But inconclusive. Could be a bear. Could be a man in dark clothing. Hard to tell from trail cam footage, especially at night. I stared at him. A bear didn't untie my rope. A bear didn't pull the mirror off my truck and set it on the hood. Hendricks met my eyes, held them for a moment, then looked away. I understand this was a frightening experience, he said. And I'm not saying you didn't see what you saw. But officially, there's nothing here I can act on. No laws broken. No property damage beyond the mirror, and that could have been vandals. 3 miles into the wilderness? Vandals? He shrugged. People do strange things. I wanted to argue, wanted to push harder, demand answers, make him admit what we both knew he was thinking. But I could see it in his face. The wall coming down, the official position locking into place. What about the other reports? I asked. You said there were others. Hendricks hesitated. Just a flicker, but I caught it. Most people prefer not to have their names attached, he said finally. And most of the reports are similar to yours. Inconclusive, unexplained, but not actionable. He stood up. The conversation was over. I'll file a report, he said. Document what you told me, but I wouldn't expect any follow-up. These things tend to stay in the filing cabinet. I drove home understanding something I probably should have known from the start. The official record would never include what happened to us. Whatever was out there in the Clearwater drainage, it didn't exist on paper. It never would. The weeks after we got back were strange. Life went on. Work, bills, groceries, all the ordinary machinery that keeps the world turning. I showed up at job sites, ran wire, troubleshot panels, talked to clients about load calculations and breaker capacities. Normal stuff. But I wasn't normal. Not anymore. I couldn't sleep through the night. Would wake up at 2 a.m., heart pounding. Sure, I'd heard footsteps outside my window. The smell would come back sometimes, that rancid musk, and I'd realize I was just remembering, just reliving it, my brain refusing to let go. I reviewed the game camera footage constantly, frame by frame, zooming in, adjusting contrast, trying to pull more detail from those grainy images, trying to convince myself it was a bear, a hoaxer, anything that fit into the world I used to live in. On the third viewing, I noticed something I'd missed. In the last triggered frame, the one I'd barely glanced at because the main figure had already moved out of view, there was something in the background, a second shape, smaller than the first, maybe 5.5 feet tall, standing further back in the trees, watching. I zoomed in until the pixels fell apart. The shape was indistinct, barely visible in the infrared wash. But it was there. Bipedal, upright, observing the larger figure from a distance. There were 2 of them, and the smaller one had been watching the bigger one interact with our camp. Learning, maybe. Being taught. The implication hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't a lone animal defending territory. This was coordinated behavior, social behavior. A larger one showing a smaller one how to handle intruders, how to intimidate, how to send messages without violence. Generational knowledge, culture, intelligence. I told my sister Linda a partial version of what happened, enough to explain why Tommy wouldn't sleep, wouldn't go outside after dark, wouldn't talk about the trip. She listened with her arms crossed and her jaw tight, and when I finished, she said, "Darren, I don't know what you think you saw out there, but my son is having nightmares, real nightmares. He wakes up screaming." She didn't believe me, not fully. I could see it in her face, the doubt, the worry, the suspicion that her brother had finally lost it. Easier to think I was crazy than to accept what I was telling her. I stopped trying to convince her, stopped trying to convince anyone. Some things you can't explain to people who haven't seen them. 5 years now. 5 years since that September in the Clearwater drainage. 5 years of living with what I know, what I saw, what I can't prove to anyone who wasn't there. I still hunt. Can't give it up entirely. It's too much a part of who I am, too woven into my history and my family. But I don't hunt Clearwater anymore. Don't go anywhere near that drainage. And I never stay overnight in deep timber. Day trips only, out before dark, every single time. Tommy is 19 now. He's in community college studying something with computers, lives with his mom, works part-time at a grocery store. Seems like a normal kid if you don't look too close. But he doesn't camp, doesn't hike, won't even go to a barbecue if it's too close to a tree line. His friends think he's just not an outdoors person. They don't know the real reason. We don't talk about what happened, not directly. But sometimes, when it's just the two of us, he'll look at me a certain way, and I'll know he's thinking about it. Remembering the footsteps, the smell, the 11 minutes in the tent, the mirror on the hood. We're bonded by it now, him and me, connected by something we can never fully share with anyone else. I don't know if that's a gift or a curse, probably both. I keep the game camera images on an encrypted folder on my laptop. Haven't deleted them, can't bring myself to. Sometimes late at night, when sleep won't come, I pull them up and look at that shape between the trees, that second figure in the background. I zoom in, study the pixels, try to find something I missed. I never do. The images are what they are, grainy, indistinct, deniable. Proof to me, meaningless to anyone else. I found some online communities a few years back. Forums where people share their experiences, compare notes, try to make sense of what they've seen. I lurk mostly, don't post much. But it helps to know I'm not alone. That other people have heard the wood knocks, smelled the smell, felt that primal terror of being watched by something that shouldn't exist. Most of them have the same story I do. They reported what happened. They were dismissed. The official record doesn't include them, just like it doesn't include ma phone. I think about my grandfather a lot these days. Roy Kubiak, Korean War veteran, logger, rancher. The hardest man I ever knew. He saw something in 1961, in the same drainage where I took Tommy 58 years later. He carried it alone for 26 years before he said a single word about it. And even then, it was just one sentence, one warning, delivered half-drunk at a family reunion. There's people out there that ain't people. I understand now why he kept quiet, why my father kept quiet, why the men in my family learned to see things and then not speak of them. It's not cowardice, it's not denial. It's the recognition that some truths can't be shared, only passed down as warnings. That's what I'm doing now, I suppose. Passing it down. Not to family this time, but to whoever's listening. Whoever's about to head into wilderness they think they know. The woods are older than us. They were here before we came, and they'll be here after we're gone. And they're not empty. Something lives in the deep timber, in the drainages and the high country, in the places where roads don't reach and cell signals don't penetrate. Something intelligent, something patient, something that's been watching for a very long time. I don't know what they are. Don't know where they came from or how many there are or what they want. I only know what they showed me, that they're real, that they're aware, and that they let me leave when they didn't have to. So here's my warning, for whatever it's worth. If you see the signs, the tracks, the knocks, the silence that falls over a forest when something's watching, don't do what I did. Don't stay. Don't investigate. Don't try to prove anything to yourself. Just leave. Because whatever's out there, it's watching. And sometimes, it lets you go. Sometimes.